Hi, so in this chapter we are going to learn about functions. When you talk about functions in JavaScript, function is a way of writing your code in a block. That will make it easy for you to reuse your code inside out, to reuse your code anytime you want. So this is how we create a function. So first of all, you will type the function keyword, which is function. And just as we do when we are assigning a value to our variable, we give it a variable name. So here we give it a variable name. We are going to add some numbers, so we give it a variable name of add. Then you bring a parenthesis. After the parenthesis, you bring a curly braces. So that's it. We have created our function. So where you will write the code is inside this curly braces. This is where our code will be. So in this function we are going to add two numbers. So let's say console log 2 plus maybe 10. So 2 plus 10. Let's save it and go to our web browser to see that there is no answer here. Let's go back to our code and see the reason. So when you create a function, how to call the function? You call it invoking the function. That's telling the function to start executing. That's why we call it invoke. So you call a function by just call the variable name and the parentheses. Let's save it, then go back to our web browser. You see we got 12. So that's it, we got 12. Let's come back to our code. We don't actually need to bring console.log 2 plus 10. We have to do something like num1 plus num2. Then we get our answer. But here, num1 plus num2, we have to first declare it. Let num1 is equal to 10. Let num2 is equal to 5. So num1 plus num2. Let's call the function and see. We got nothing here. Let's go back and put it in the console. So num1 plus num2. Let's save it and go back to the web browser. Okay, we got 15. That's right. But we can make it way simpler than this. Let's clear it all. So the purpose of this function is to add two numbers. So let's say num1, we are adding num1 and num2. But here we don't have any num1 or num2, any value in num1 or num2. That's the purpose of this parenthesis. We come here and we say num1 comma num2, which means num1 here is num1 and num2 here is representing num2 here. So whatever goes inside this parenthesis, we call them parameters. So if we were just having num1, it would be one parameter, but having num1 and num2 will be having two parameters. So but now we don't have any value for num1. We still don't have any value for num1 and num2. So that's when we use the invocation. When we are invoking it, we give it the value that should have been inside num1 and num2. So the first parameter is num1. So num1 we give it 10. Then comma num2 we give it maybe 5. So let's save it. But before that, you have to bring return. and we put this inside the console.log. Let's save it and run it. Okay, we got 15 like we were expecting. So I'll explain everything here. When you write the code, return means you should return num1 plus num2 whenever you call or invoke the function. So invoking it, we pass 10 at the first, and whatever comes inside the invocation parameter, the invocation parenthesis is called arguments. But when it's inside the parenthesis in the function, main function, it is called parameter. But when it comes here, it is arguments. So we had num1 here, num2. So now we have 10 and 5. So this 10 will come inside this num1 and will be directed to here, num1. So this num1 will become 10. And when we call add and say 5 will go to num2, and num2 will be directed to num2 inside the function. So it will be 10 plus 5. And note one thing. Immediately you say return will return whatever you have typed here, but whatever code that will come after the return will not be executed. As soon as it sees return, it returns what it has, and the rest will not be returned. The rest will not be executed. So let's add one number to it. So then we will come here and say comma num3. Then we will come to the code inside and add num3. Then we will come inside our argument, we will come inside our invocation and type the number we want to give to num3. Let me say 15. So now the 10 will go to num1 and will be directed to num1 inside the code. 5 will go to num2, it will be doing the same thing, and num3 will also be doing the same thing. So the way of arranging it matters most. So here num1, num2, num3. When you say 10, when you put the 10 in place of the 5, like this, the 5 here, and you put 10 here, you have changed the digits. So 5 will now be inside num1, 10 will be now inside num2. So it depends on the arrangement. You arrange it the same way you have arranged it here. So let's save it and go to our web browser. Okay, the answer is 30. So that is how we create a function.